All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jane Rumrill. I'm the Events and Outreach Manager at Essex County Greenbelt. For those of you who might not know Greenbelt, we are a land trust serving the 34 towns and cities of Essex County. We're a member-supported nonprofit protecting natural land across the county, helping conserve healthy ecosystems, clean water, local food supplies, scenic landscapes, and free and accessible places for all to benefit from nature. A couple of housekeeping things before we begin today. Live captioning is available for this webinar, so if you'd like to turn the closed captioning on or off, you can do so from your Zoom menu at the bottom. Look for the words live transcript, and you can enable that or turn it off. If you'd like to ask a question during the webinar, please use the Q&A function also on that Zoom menu, and we'll try to get all your questions answered at the end of the presentation, but you can submit them at any time. Even though we are online today, we are going to be talking about real physical land. So I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement before we start. The properties that Greenbelt conserves are on the ancestral lands of the Pennacook and Pawtucket, bands of Abenaki-speaking people. For thousands of years, these inhabitants and their families fished, hunted, farmed, conducted ceremonies, and developed deep stewardship connections to these unceded lands and waterways. Join us, please, in honoring the elders who lived here before, the Indigenous descendants today, and the generations to come. So with that introduction, I'd like to pass it over to our friends at West Newbury Wild and Native.
Thank you, Jane. Hi, everyone. I'm Carol Decker with West Newbury Wild and Native, and thank you to Jane and a special thanks to Essex County Greenbelt for hosting this important program with our organization. West Newbury Wild and Native is a group of residents from West Newbury and also our adjacent towns who are passionate about promoting our native plants, our pollinators, and also wildlife-friendly gardening and controlling invasive plants in our yards and throughout the towns. We will promote a no-mow or low-mow May campaign this spring to help our residents look at their lawns in a new way, encouraging changes, even small ones, that can benefit our declining pollinators. Thus, we are so pleased to welcome Dan Jaffe Wilder for this important program on why we need to rethink our lawns. Dan is an ecologist, a botanist, an expert, and author on native plants, and the director of applied ecology for the Norcross Wildlife Foundation in Wales, Mass. Dan is passionate on this subject and brings considerable knowledge to give options on replacing turf and the benefits to wildlife it will provide. Dan has so much to share with us. We welcome you, Dan. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Carol. Thank you, Jane, for helping to set this up. I'm going to take over all of your screens right now. Let me know if you're not seeing my title screen. So this lecture is entitled Kill Your Lawn. This is a kind of an assessment of lawn culture in America and what it does to our landscapes. For those of you who don't know me, I spent about 10 years over at Garden in the Woods. That's where most people know me. It was New England Wildflower Society at the time, Native Plant Trust now. I now work for Norcross Wildlife Foundation. If anyone's unfamiliar with Norcross Wildlife Foundation, we are a wildlife conservation organization with kind of dreams of being a land trust. We steward about 8,400 acres in South Central Mass, North Central Connecticut, the original land of the Nipmuc Nation. Our work is basically designed around trying to facilitate healthy wildlife habitat. That is our #1 goal. We have a lot of other goals, but that's always top of the list. And part of that, as I've come onto the organization, is to reassess those lawns that exist at the wildlife sanctuary. I was a little surprised when I first showed up to see how many lawns existed at the wildlife sanctuary, and pretty much since day one, I've been slowly killing them. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I do today. I'm going to talk more about what I think anybody can do in terms of their lawns. And I like to put this out there out front. The title of this lecture, Kill Your Lawn, is really meant to catch everyone's eyes. It tends to do that pretty well. What I want to do today is give you information and tools to be able to decide for yourself what is best for your particular situation. I'm going to give you all the tools you need to destroy your entire lawn and every lawn in your community. I'm also going to encourage you to just reduce your lawn a little bit, or just plant one more native plant, or just remove one invasive species. There is some great value in these kind of small steps we can take. So never feel bad that you haven't done enough. None of us have done enough, myself included, and I've dedicated my life to this. It's a process. We're all just going to do a little bit at a time. So with that in mind, I want to jump into things. So we're going to start with what we're doing here today. I'm going to talk at first about why I have a vendetta against lawns. What are the problems associated with lawns? There's a lot of them. We'll focus on a few of them today. I'm going to introduce this idea that I call the gradients of ecology, which is pretty much the more we do, the more we get out of our landscape, or the more we can then provide for wildlife, ranging from that perfect lawn that you might see in the picture here to a healthy meadow or forest on the other end of the spectrum. And as we get into that, I'm going to give you these various tools. So assuming you think I'm kind of crazy and you don't really feel like destroying your entire lawn, I'm going to give you tools for treating your traditional lawn more sustainably and with more, of an environmental sense. We're going to move into the non-native lawn alternatives. Those are things like eco lawns and clover lawns. We will then shift into purely native species lawns, things like strawberry lawns or carex lawns. That's carex as in sedge, not carrots as in what we eat. And then we'll get into what I just call not lawns, which is, this area doesn't actually need to be a lawn of any sort anymore. I'm going to turn it back into a forest or make it into a meadow or something that is no longer a lawn at all. So let's start with the problem. Here is the doom and gloom session of today's lecture. What is the problem with lawns? Why am I such not a big fan? They're the largest crop in the United States by far, the largest irrigated crop at least. They cover more space than corn, wheat, and fruit trees combined. There are plenty of issues with the way that we grow plenty of our corn, wheat, and fruit trees, but frankly, at least they all feed us. That's not something that can be said about our lawns. We spend $40 billion on lawns in America annually. That is a huge amount of money. And we're spending about 6 hours every single warm month mowing our lawn on average across this country. And we put a lot of stuff on our lawns. And this is where some of the problems really get substantial. A lot of pesticides, a lot of fertilizers. Those then run into our streams and our rivers and our waterways and create things like the Gulf Dead Zone that we can see pictured here. And of those 60 million acre feet of water that we put on the lawns, does it not say water there anymore? Geez, I edited this, I pulled out that important thing. So that's 60 million acre feet of water. That's mostly potable water. That's stuff that we could be drinking. So to put that into a little bit of perspective, if we were to take all of that water and magically kind of spread it around the world willy-nilly and give it to every single person on this planet who is currently lacking clean drinking water, we'd be able to give every one of those people 7 gallons of water every single day. It is a huge amount of water that is frankly just wasted on this pointless crop. And of these pesticides that we use, they do some pretty horrible things. And this is specifically to us. For the moment, we're going to ignore all the ecological damage. This is just human health effects. They do some pretty awful things. The most common one we use is the one on the top of this list, 2,4-D. You can see it's kind of got X's across the board there. It's a problem. This is something that is used every single day on many lawns, almost certainly in just about every town in America. This is a very, very common product. This is used on our soccer fields. This is used on our town greens. This is used on our roadsides. This is the chemical that is used on lawns almost all the time. If you're not spraying your lawn, you may not have it at home. There's a misnomer thinking if I'm not spraying my lawn, I'm not coming into contact with this stuff, but this is very regular. And you can see what I've highlighted here is that you see a lot of things talking about excessive exposure or prolonged or repeated exposure. And the issue with that is that we are all coming into contact with this very regularly. So we're receiving that repeated exposure, which can cause some really major issues. And we are in a biodiversity crisis. This is why I look at lawns and I think, geez, that's a waste of space. We could be doing something better with that area. We're looking at some huge declines in global insect populations. We're looking at huge declines in bird populations. We are losing 13 million hectares of forest every single year. That is a huge amount of forest being lost. And we've lost 68 vertebrates in the past 50 years. These are not small numbers. This should be a wake-up call for many of us. And to bring it really close to home, in Massachusetts, we lost 25,000 acres to development in the past 5 years. I always tend to try and kind of find a nice balance between, development and conservation. I would love to say that we can just, end all development. That's not realistic, though. It's not something that we would ever be able to, or frankly, even want to do. So I'm not a anti-development person. What I am is an anti-stupid development person. I want us to be smart about the places we develop the landscape. And that's why I get really upset when I see 9,300 acres of high priority conservation land lost to development. Those are the sort of areas that I am going to say we really ought to not be developing. Those are those unique habitats, the unique landscape features, the rare natural communities, the sort of areas that we should be leaving alone as we build our communities like this one in this picture, or maybe not quite like that one, but as we build our communities in other areas that are not considered high priority conservation land. So what do we do about this? We build habitat locally. That means I'm building habitat in my backyard. It means I am building habitat in my community. We also act regionally by supporting kind of regional land conservation efforts. And that means folks like the Greenbelt Land Trust. That means for my local area, the Opakam Land Trust. That means folks like Norcross Wildlife Foundation. Though we don't frankly usually look for support. Find someone else, Nature Conservancy, Mass Audubon. There's some great regional players around this area, and they could really use our help. So if you're not sure what you want to do in terms of getting outside of just your backyard, start looking at some of these fantastic organizations and get involved. So what can we do, each and every one of us? Well, we can kill our lawns. And this is where these gradients of ecology come in. So we're going to start with, at the top of the list, it should probably be the bottom of the list, is the perfect lawn. And by perfect, what I mean is your classic golf course. So, perfect monoculture of European turf grasses, usually Kentucky bluegrass and a few other species, depending on your region. This is mowed excessively. This is treated excessively. This is watered excessively. It is the perfect lawn. And those sorts of areas, frankly, kill life. Those are the areas that, are about as ecologically viable as a parking lot. As we start moving down that list and getting higher in terms of our ecology, though, we start treating those lawns in a more ecologically sensitive manner, and that starts doing less harm. We start looking at some of the lawn alternatives out there, and then we start getting into a kind of almost a neutral zone. And as we start working with native alternatives and then rewilding the areas, we can start to really build habitat in these areas that we might have previously called lawn. So starting with your traditional lawn, a few simple things that anybody can do that really make a big difference. So this is Kentucky bluegrass, and I'm just going to lump all the turf grasses together and just kind of throw it all under Kentucky bluegrass for the moment. Kentucky bluegrass is not from Kentucky. It's a wide-ranging kind of European Asian species. It grows in a part of the world where it tends to receive higher rainfall than we get in New England, and we got a lot of rainfall around here. Higher levels of available nutrients. And it's growing, when it's growing naturally, it doesn't constantly get mowed, so it's able to develop more of a root system. This picture is really quite accurate. You've got these tiny, tiny, tiny little roots on our lawn grasses, and then you can see all the kind of prairie species and grassland and meadow species moving along with these nice, thick, deep roots. So the problem with Kentucky bluegrass is that it just doesn't grow very well around here. So in order for us to have these successful lawns, we need to water it, hence all that water loss we talked about, and we need to fertilize it, hence all the fertilizer we talked about, which is a little funny because we add water, we add fertilizer, we get the stuff to actually start growing, and God forbid it puts on some growth, we immediately break out our mowers and cut the thing down to size. And plants grow in balance. The root system of the tree is going to be, to one extent or another, comparable to the spread of the tree, and that goes true for your herbaceous plants, your grasslands, everything. So every time you're cutting the blades of grass, you're interrupting that plant's ability to develop a good root system. And that's frankly one of the first things we can do to start solving these problems, is dealing with that. And as we have these problems, we get issues, weeds, diseases, and pests that emerge. And most of the time when something like this emerges, whether it be a pest or a disease, our solution is often to treat the symptom, but not the underlying cause. You know, if we get something like clover in the lawn, we will go in and spray a herbicide that kills the clover. We won't deal with the soil compaction. That would make the clover not come back on us. If we have a fungal disease, we spray an anti-fungicide. It doesn't change the fact that the grass is susceptible to fungus. There are things we can do to start working against these underlying causes. Increasing mowing height is frankly probably the easiest one to do. When you're mowing your lawn, set your mowing blades, I'd say 3 inches at an absolute minimum. 3.5 to 4 inches is frankly quite a bit better. The higher you can go in terms of your mowing height, the more of a root system your lawn is going to be able to develop. And with a better root system, it's going to be better able to absorb the water and nutrients that are present in the soil. It'll also solve a lot of the problems that you will see with some of the other species that tend to kind of grow in amongst your lawn. Addressing compaction is another one that is really, frankly, quite easy to do. For most homeowners, compaction is going to be minor, minimal, in most cases non-existent. Compaction becomes more of an issue when you're talking about the soccer field, the town green, or, you know, if you had some contractors over there driving equipment around on your lawn in the wet weather, that's going to cause compaction. But for most of us, applying compost will solve our compaction problems. Compost is good at pretty much fluffing the soil. It boosts the amount of microbial life in the soil. And with all that life comes air pockets and this kind of fluffing sort of action. It's also going to add fertility and moisture holding capacity. So it kind of solves multiple problems at once, which is nice. No one can complain with that. If you need to go a little bit further, you can often get away with a basic aeration setup like this. These are spikes. You can buy them online. You stick them on your shoes. You walk around on your lawn. If you're a little bit more intense than that, you can go to the rental center and buy a lawn compactor, which kind of looks like a lawnmower, except it has a thing of spikes on the bottom that just poke into your lawn. It's a very simple thing, but it works quite well. As I said, this isn't typically needed for most home lawn situations. The last thing is to embrace the weeds. We have been taught that these plants are problematic in lawns. It was a fantastic campaign run mostly by Scott's Miracle-Gro back in the 80s. But to put it into a bit of a perspective, think about it this way. You have two options. You can grow a lawn that is a whole bunch of low-growing green stuff, or you can grow a lawn that is a whole bunch of low-growing green stuff with some yellow, some blue, some white, some pink, and some red mixed in. Which do you choose? It's when you start thinking about it and start really kind of going through it, you realize that a lot of these lawn weeds are frankly not weeds. If anything, I'd say the lawn is the weeds and I want more of the violets. But if you want to keep your lawn, what is the problem with having violets or dandelions or bluets in your lawn? Because as far as I can tell, there is no problem. There's only benefits. So some of my favorite lawn weeds, the violets are probably top of my list. Come in a variety of different colors and species, most of which are native to our region. These are two that are very common in my area and frankly will be very common in your area as well. Viola sagittata is called the sand violet. If you have thin soils, sandy soils, rocky soils, there's a very good chance you've got this one around. Sometimes called the arrowleaf violet. That being said, our common variety is the non-arrow shaped arrowleaf violet. So it's a little bit of a misnomer. Sand violet, I think, is fitting. Woolly blue violet, Viola ceroria, is another common species. Will also grow in the dry areas, but will also be found in the more richer areas, which many lawns are if they've been treated with fertilizers in the past. If you see blue violets around, there's a very good chance you're looking at one of these two. And more often than not, it's the one on the right here, woolly blue violet. Very, very common species, very, very valuable species on the landscape. We'll talk about the specific value of these plants a little further on in this lecture. Though we can mention here the regal fritillary butterfly, which is a specialist that the butterfly itself will feed on a variety of different plants, but the caterpillar needs violets. It is a specialist and it will feed on a variety of violets. It doesn't really need any specific one, though it does seem to have a tendency to really enjoy the bird's foot violet, but it's happy for these as well. Bluets, Houstonia cerulea, sometimes called Quaker ladies or no pisthabeds because they used to be used as an antidiuretic in herbal medicine. This is a lovely small little flower ranging from white into this kind of periwinkle blue color. Occasionally you see one with pink tinges to it as well. This is a fantastic species that many of us already have in our lawns. This is kind of, I think, one of the real stars of the no-mow or low-mow campaigns that was mentioned earlier. Because many people already have bluets and just don't know it. Because if you start mowing in April or May, you're going to be mowing these things before they can ever produce any flowers, and you'll never see them do their thing. That being said, if you do, go for that No Mow May campaign, there's a very decent chance you're going to start seeing quite a bit of these, which is a lovely thing to see. So getting into some improved non-native options for lawn alternatives. You find these things that go under various names to one extent or another called eco-lawn, eco-grass. They are often all going to be some sort of a mix of cool season fescues. If anyone's ever confused by cool season, warm season, the way it works is the temperature it's describing is the season that things grow in. So cool season fescues grow in the cool season, as in spring and fall. Kentucky bluegrass, most of our European turf grasses, those are warm season grasses, which is why you've got to do all this mowing in the warm season, pretty much in the summertime. So when you think about it, having everything shifting over from a warm season to a cool season setup means that growth is only happening during those cooler seasons. It's much, much slower, and your need to mow drops very drastically. Your mowing is often done once or twice a year, in some cases not at all, at least after establishment. And the amount of carbon that we are releasing in our mowers immediately drops to a very, very large extent. This is probably the best thing that can be said about these lawns, is that the maintenance on them is next to nothing compared to a traditional lawn. That is a huge win. Ecologically, they don't have the same value as the native species, but even just that there, the lack of mowing is a huge step forward. Throw on to that the fact that these are species that have evolved in thinner soils. They require no water or fertilizer once they're established. Two that I have tested and worked with to a good extent in the past: Eco-Lawn, which is available through Prairie Maroon, Eco-Grass, available through Wildflower Farm. There's a lot of others out there, and as you look at the kind of species listed in them, they're all pretty much the same. So I see no reason not to go for Ernst Conservation Seeds or the Pineland Seed Mix, or really anything that's available, assuming it's this kind of, cool season fescue eco-lawn mix. White clover is another good option. This is something that's becoming more popular. This is another non-native species. That being said, once established, it is also drought and reasonably shade tolerant. It fixes nitrogen, so it kind of feeds itself and any violets or bluets that are growing in amongst it. It's not a native species. It's not going to have the same ecological value as the native, but it's got pretty good ecological value for a non-native species. It's at least a good source of kind of generalist bee food. So the major advantages to these non-native alternative lawns are really time and cost. These can be established in 1 to 2 seasons, something that most of the native species can't do. These are also available pretty much through your hardware store, or you can go online and order a bag of seed, and then with some good soil prep, you can just throw your seed down. That's something that you cannot do with the native alternatives that we're going to get to next. For the most part, the natives need to be planted as plugs or as established plants or as divisions, or there's a variety of different things, but there are really none that you can just throw seed down for. Not yet, at least. The disadvantages are really the lessening of ecological value. These are a lot less damaging than a traditional lawn. Some of them, like the clover here, offer a little bit of ecological benefit, but they're nothing compared to the native species that we're going to get to next in terms of value on the landscape for pollinators and wildlife. So let's talk about these natives. Question here is, what if could your lawn look like this without any mowing, watering, or fertilizer? This is Carex pennsylvanica. This is the same plant, both mowed and unmowed. This is another cool season grower. It puts on all of its growth in the early spring. So if you want it to stay low, you could mow it just once in the late spring to early summer and then just leave it for the rest of the season. We have some Carex lawns at Norcross that we often mow once a year, sometimes once every other year. And really what we're doing there is to just keep the tree seedlings out so we can keep it as some sort of a lawn for these areas. This is what it'll look like in spring before any first mowing. This picture was probably taken sometime in June. Here it is growing at Norcross in dense shade. This is a very shade tolerant plant. In fact, of all the plants we're going to talk about today, this is the most shade tolerant by quite a ways. And this is it growing in full sun at its full height, unmowed for the season. So if you've got nothing against the kind of lush lawn look, you can just leave this thing and it'll look like this all season. It's a nice looking plant. It can handle mild foot traffic, but I wouldn't, play a game of soccer on top of this thing. We'll give you some other plants for that in a moment. It's a rhizomatous spreader, which is quite nice. And what that means is it's spreading underground. So what's good about rhizomatous spreaders or stoloniferous spreaders that we'll get to with the next example is that they spread. So if, let's say, you want to do your whole lawn, but you're not ready to do the whole lawn in one swing, you can do a small section of the lawn. And then when you're ready for the next session, you can start taking pieces out of the section you already did and move them over. And those holes you just dug will fill back in, and the new ones you just planted will fill in, and you can kind of leapfrog along, which is often the way I recommend doing whole lawn conversions, because a whole lawn conversion in one fell swoop is a lot of work. And it's nice to take it piecemeal, much more doable. So here's some downsides on this one. This is the most expensive option, and it is the slowest option. This will take 3 to 4 years from scratch. It's a slow grower. That's nice in terms of the lack of mowing needed, but that means that in terms of filling in, we're looking at 3 to 4 years. It's also one that is frankly quite a challenge to grow, especially if you want to go so far as sourcing this as seed-grown plants, which is a nice thing to do from an environmental point of view, but means that it's going to be that much slower. So what the LP32 means there, that's a 32 cell plug. So plug trays always come in the same size. So the smaller the number, the bigger the plug, the bigger the number, the smaller the plug. So a 32 is a big fat plug, $1.90 per plug. Depending on how you want to do this, you're going to be planting these 6 to 8 inches apart, and then it needs to fill in. Give it 3 to 4 years. Wild strawberry, I think this might be my personal favorite if I'm going to pick a single species lawn replacement. This is a native species. This is a fantastic native species. It provides these flowers in the springtime that are, really quite beautiful to look at, visited by a few different native bumblebees. It is pretty good bumblebee food. It's not great bumblebee food. It is phenomenal caterpillar food. We'll get to that in a bit, though. It also produces fruit, which I really like. I'm always hungry, and my kind of knock earlier about corn, wheat, and soy at least feeding us. It'd be kind of nice if our lawns fed us. So the next couple of pictures are a lawn that I planted at Norcross. So this is the first year we planted it. We planted this lawn in the spring. You can see the plants behind my hand there. They're a little blurred, but what you can see there is that we just planted them. There's a lot of space in between. It's definitely not what you would call a filled-in lawn just yet. So that lawn right there is probably a month old and produced fruit that first season, which is kind of phenomenal. It's a small crop, but I was happy for anything. Year 2 in spring, you can see it's mostly filled in. You can definitely still see some holes there, but there's not a lot of them. There's definitely a lot more, kind of lawn than there is dirt at this point. The nice thing about year 2 is this will be the year of the largest berries that you will ever get unless you purposely abuse your lawn, which is actually a good thing in this case. And the reason for that is that at this point, these plants are just growing as much as they can. They haven't started to yet compete with each other, so they can have these big, beautiful berries. For year 3, 4, 5, and so forth down the line, you'll get more berries, but they'll be smaller. The plant's starting to compete with itself. This is that very same season, so year 2 in fall. The lawn is at this point filled in entirely. You really can't see any holes in it. It's also producing some really lovely fall color, which I liked quite a bit. This is a fantastic plant. It's also quite a bit faster than the Carex pennsylvanica we just talked about. You can easily do this one in 2 years. The reason I say 2 to 3 is what you can also do is really spread out your planting if you want to do this kind of on the cheap. You can plant these at 6 to 8 inches and they'll be filled in within a season and a half, definitely 2. You could do 8 to 10 inches and be filled in 2 years. But if you wanted to plant these 24 inches apart, you'll have a lawn in 3 years and it'll cost you a third of as much. Prices on these, 95 cents a plug. That's for an LP50. So you get now 50 plugs for that tray instead of the 32 for the previously. So smaller plugs, cheaper, faster growing, much more abuse tolerant. And what I mean by abuse is foot traffic. So if we're talking about an area where you're going to be regularly walking on your lawn, or I'm thinking at home where I've got a strawberry lawn that can handle, digging dogs, digging chickens, and us out there, kind of walking on it all the time. This is my lawn under our orchard. It can handle all of that abuse, no problem. If I ever found a municipality that allowed me to replace their soccer field with a native plant, this is the one I would choose, because this is the one that could handle it. American heel-all, sometimes called self-heal. This is a new-ish one. I've been working with this one for 4 years now, so we're really starting to get to know it pretty well at this point. It was definitely experimental at first, and now it's really just an experimental success. So it's Prunella vulgaris subspecies lanceolata. That subspecies in this case is distinguishing the native American heel-all from the European, which is Prunella vulgaris subspecies vulgaris. The European doesn't have the same ecological value. It also doesn't grow the same way. It's more of an ephemeral. It tends to go dormant in the season, whereas our Native American one is a just solid perennial. It's there all season long. So in terms of lawn and ecologically, you definitely want our native one, which is usually what you see on the landscape. This is a native of the mint family. It's a reasonably vigorous grower, but not nearly as vigorous as you might imagine if you're thinking of something like a spearmint or a peppermint. It's about the same spread, maybe a little less than the wild strawberry. And I've actually found that wild strawberry and American heel-all can be put together into a lawn matrix and work quite nicely together. It is probably one of the easiest plants in the world to propagate. This was my first ever attempt propagating it. And what I did was to fill that plug tray with soil, collect some seed on the landscape, and just sprinkle seeds directly into the plug cells. So I didn't do it in a seed flat. It just went directly into the plug cell. And what you can see there is I overseeded it. What I want is maybe 1 or 2, at the most 3 seedlings per cell. Instead, in some cases, I've got what looks like 15 seedlings per cell. And what that means is it's very easy to propagate. So anybody can collect seed on this one. It's easy to collect seed. Anyone can sow seed on this one. It'll germinate very quickly. And whatever doesn't germinate the season you sow it will germinate the following spring, and it's ready for planting by late spring, early summer. A really easy one to work with. Now, one downside to this one, here's some pictures of it at work at Norcross, is that you'll notice I don't have a plug price on this one. It is not available on the market. I've not seen anyone who yet has it available. It's in production. I know that Blue Stem Natives out in Norwell, they're now selling this plant. I know Prairie Moon and North Creek Nurseries have this one in production. Frankly, I would be surprised if you couldn't find plugs of this one this year. That being said, no one has yet listed plugs available for sale. So if you want it, you've kind of got to grow it yourself, or know someone who's growing it, or get a patch going and then just divide off of it, which is very doable with this one. Quite quickly to fill in. Right around the same range as the wild strawberry. The picture on the right there is a lawn that we planted. That lawn was planted in summer, and that picture is in fall. It filled in about a third of a season. That being said, we had way too many plants available, and we just massed them in a whole lot closer than is necessary. So that's why I'll say 2 to 3 years is probably the realistic sort of planting, unless you just want to throw some money at it and get it to grow in faster. You can do what we did. Except you can't throw money at it because it's not available. So there's some bad advice. Okay, let's talk about some specifics. What do these plants do for the landscape from an ecological point of view? All right, so starting with Kentucky bluegrass, keep in mind, again, I'm kind of just lumping all the European turf grasses together here. This is exotic, and what that means is non-native. There is no value to bees. Even if it could bloom, we mow it much too often for it ever to bloom. It is the host plant for one native caterpillar, the grass skipper, which will host on just about any other grass in this region. So it really doesn't need this plant. It's the one that might make some use of it if we didn't mow it down every time it tried. So pretty much this plant is useless. White clover. So remember, what I said about this one is it's non-native, but it's also reasonably valuable for a non-native species, and that's its bee value. This is a pretty darn decent nectar source, even more so if you start working with the red clover, although red clover doesn't work as a lawn nearly as effective as white clover does. It's a host plant for at least 2 native caterpillars. No one has really studied the native caterpillars' interactions with white clover in this region. But you'll notice I say likely more native caterpillars here. And the reason for that is if you go down south of our region, get into, say, Delaware, Maryland, that sort of area, there are native trifolium species, native clovers. And down there, those native clovers are exceptionally valuable plants, even more so than the wild strawberry that I'll talk about in a moment. That is a phenomenal plant in our region. And so to think that none of our native caterpillars that feed on native trifolium wouldn't also feed on the non-native trifolium is probably not accurate. All of them won't, but some of them likely will. So I'm looking for someone to do some research to say, how valuable is this non-native clover to native Lepidoptera? I don't expect it's going to be very high, but I think it's probably going to surprise us and be at least a little bit more valuable than we currently think. But that's all just guesswork at this point. Red fescue is native or exotic, depending on which subspecies you're working with. Festuca rubra subspecies rubra is our native one. It's also the one you will not be finding if you're looking to buy eco-lawn, eco-grass, or even just red fescue seed in any bulk. It's all the European subspecies. There's no value to bees here. The native subspecies is a host to 6 caterpillars. There's a decent chance that at least some of those would host on the non-native one, but there's also a very decent chance that not all of them would. Maybe none of them, maybe 1 or 2, if we're lucky, 3 or 4. Again, there's, if anyone here is looking for some graduate research, these are all good options for you. Okay, violets are where we start really talking value. The violets are a host plant to 30 different native caterpillars, and quite a few of those specialize on violets and violet relatives. They play a pretty solid role in terms of their ecological value on the landscape. There's also some value there to some generalist bees and some pollinating flies in the flower. That being said, the leaves are where the real value of this one comes in, and there are quite a few caterpillars that go out specifically looking for violets. These are fantastic on the landscape. Anyone who ever tells you violets are weeds doesn't know what they're talking about. Pennsylvania sedge. I've always loved this example because this is a sedge. It doesn't produce an insect pollinated flower, and yet it is the host plant for 36 native caterpillars. And what that means is that this sedge is in many cases more valuable than the pollinator gardens as a whole that are sometimes planted, depending on what you're putting in your pollinator garden. And that is both a knock at poorly designed pollinator gardens, where we should give them more attention and really make sure we're talking about more than just flower visitors. It's also a knock towards carex and its immense value. 36 native caterpillars on a herbaceous plant is a mighty respectable number. There is some value to bees here. It is not an insect pollinated flower, but I have observed bees feeding on the pollen of it, but it's pretty minimal. That being said, this is a fantastic plant that can work well in amongst others. And frankly, if you've got a pollinator garden that's got mulch in between your plants, start planting Carex pennsylvanica in place of mulch, and you've now just improved your pollinator garden. Wild strawberry, as I mentioned, my personal favorite, host plant to 87 different native caterpillars. That is by far the most valuable plant we will be talking about today. That is wildly respectable. In terms of herbaceous plants, the only genus in our region that beats out the wild strawberry are the goldenrods. They support about 115 different species. If you want to beat out the wild strawberry, other than goldenrods, you're looking at woody species, things like maples, birches, oaks. There is, again, some value for generalist bees and some pollinating flies, but the flowers are not a hugely important source. The leaves are. And it's kind of cool. If you start going around to a strawberry lawn and go looking at those leaves right now, you just find they're full of little holes. And that is the sign that things have been eating them. But it's really, you can't see the holes in this picture. You step away and it's just a nice thick cover of wild strawberry. It's not damaging in terms of the health of the plant, but it is definitely beneficial in terms of the health of the ecosystem. American heal-all, this is one that we were just starting to get some decent data on. I don't yet have any data on its host plant value. I put in here likely low. As I mentioned, this is a member of the mint family. And the reason we like mints is because they are minty. And I mean that in a very broad sense. So bee balm is, it's not really minty in the traditional sense, but it's got those fragrant, compounds to it. Anise, hyssop, skullcap, and then your traditional mints like spearmint, peppermint, Canada mint. Those minty flavors are a bunch of pretty much anti-insectivorous compounds, and they work quite well. And so you'll find there's really not a lot of things that eat the leaves of the mint plants, at least in the insect realm. There's some specialists, there's some, exceptions to the rule, but in general, there's not a lot of activity. That being said, the mint family's flowers tend to be very important, and this one even more so. It's very high in value to a bunch of generalist bees. It is also very high in value to some of the most at-risk bee species in our region. Specifically Bombus vagans, Bombus tetracola, and Bombus sandersonii. Oh, there's another one. I'm not a bee guy. I'm pretending I'm a bee guy thanks to the work of Dr. Robert Gegeer, who's been visiting Norcross and has been writing out a lot of good stuff. He's also been studying this species amongst others and has been saying, like, I'm seeing all of these really at-risk species that seem to really prefer this species. So this is one that should be included in our lawns, should be included in our gardens, should be included in our green roofs and our meadows and just about anywhere else. There's some real value there. Bluets Houstonia, this one's just for us. There's some value to native bees. There's definitely some early season specialists and some pollinating flies, but it's not huge value. Host plant data, I can't find any, but I have been so enamored with this plant for so many years, and I've been looking at it for so long, and I can't recall ever in my life seeing a caterpillar on it. So though there's probably some caterpillar somewhere who eats it, it's a pretty low, value. That being said, they're just so damn adorable. They're definitely not causing any harm. They're doing at least some good. I'm happy to include them in my lawns. And the nice thing about including them is mostly all that means is just don't mow and they pop up. So we've been talking about species as if it's going to be a strawberry lawn or a self-heal lawn or a whatever lawn. And in some cases, that's really not necessary. You can have these matrix of species in many instances, depending on your conditions and what you're trying to accomplish. This list is available as a handout. I'll be happy to send it along. And this is also something that you can kind of, develop yourself by looking through the Native Plant Trust website is a garden plant finder, which is quite useful for these sorts of things. And you're going to want to find plants that are reasonably similar in terms of these conditions that are mentioned here. You don't want something that's got a low spread rate next to something that's got a high spread rate, because eventually you're going to have that high spread rate and none of the low spread rate left. Obviously, foot traffic tolerance is really important in some areas and pretty much not important in others. It's a question, how often are you really walking on your lawn? And by your lawn, I mean every section of your lawn. Because there are plenty of places that I realized when I started looking at this, like, that lawn over there, we walk around, that corner of it all the time, but the rest of it, there's no kids playing on it. There's no dogs on it. It's really not getting a lot of foot traffic. I could get away with low foot traffic tolerance. Other areas, it's like, it's under my orchard. I'm constantly stomping on it. I need something with higher tolerance. This is what I meant by giving you the tools to make up your own mind. Take this list and make it your own. Do what you see fit with it. So how's my timing? I'm doing okay with timing. So here's the question. Can your lawn be reduced? One thing that I think is a pretty decent idea is the idea of using turf as trail amongst gardens. And it doesn't necessarily need to be Kentucky bluegrass turf. This is where it could be, a self-heal turf or a wild strawberry turf, although the spread of wild strawberries adjacent to gardens is something to consider. But this idea is that, lawn has got a real purpose. It is our trail. It's the area we need to be walking instead of just I don't know what to do with this area, I'll do lawn. Another idea is to take an overhead picture of your property. You can get this right off of Google Maps and just take a quick look at your space and say, you know what? Do I really need lawn in these areas? Even if my kids are playing, on the lawn, do I want them playing right up against the road that I'm assuming is at the bottom of this picture? Maybe I could really remove that section of the lawn. Or what about that narrow, weird strip in the back that's a pain in the butt to mow? Why is that still lawn? These are the sort of things that can very quickly reduce your lawn by 40%. And then from there, pick a small area and start the conversion process kind of a little bit at a time. Do that leapfrog thing that I mentioned earlier in terms of kind of moving a few plants from one established section to the next, and you can start to expand out. You can also start to just kind of plant in what I call these, these half lawn plants. These are plants that work really well in between, say, a formal garden space and a formal lawn space. Often a single species, maybe 2 or 3. Sporobulus heterolepis is a lovely textural kind of, it's a grass. It's got this kind of waterfall-like effect. I always thought it looks like flowing water. It's a slow growing, but a fantastic species. Little blue stem, another good grass species. This one in fall is just phenomenal. This picture is in fall. You see some of that fall color. Yellow tick seed used to be very popular in the 80s, seems to have gone out of style. I'm not sure why. I'm trying to bring it back. It is a tried and true native species. It can handle a lot of abuse. If you're going to source it, I would recommend trying to find natural species. Most of the cultivars out there are sterile, as in they don't feed the bees at all, despite the fact that they look like they should. The nice thing about Anise hyssop and this one, broadleaf mountain mint, is that these are aromatic. They're mint family plants. So as they start to spread into your lawn and you hit them with the mower, you get this lovely smell of mint in the air, which I think is just a very nice moment as you're out in your garden. And then, of course, you can work with trees, shrubs, kind of meadow strips, wildflower strips. You can do really whatever you want. You're not restricted by any means to these species. But these are ones I've used in the past and used quite effectively. Or let's get into the not lawns. Let's say we want to get rid of our lawn and build a meadow. A small scale meadow is not going to be nearly as valuable as a 200-acre meadow, but it's still going to be pretty valuable. And compared to a lawn, it's going to be infinitely more valuable. You've got a couple different options for building a meadow. In most cases, if you simply stop mowing, it's likely to result in just a tall, weedy lawn. There are few instances where kind of just, getting rid of a lawn by not mowing is actually effective. Those tend to be in areas where your soils are very, very thin, very sandy. Glacial outwashes is really the only example I can think of. And these are areas where the lawn is already, 90% dead, and you can just kind of let the native plants then overtake it. And things like little blue stem and baptisia will kind of take its place. The other end of the spectrum, the really, really, really wet areas where the lawn's just drowning out, you can get other species like Joe Pye weed that you can see in this picture that can really take off. This is a very wet area, despite the way it looks in this picture. And the goldenrod in there that looks like your common goldenrod is actually a species called roundleaf goldenrod that grows in wetlands. Really, what is often a better option is to zero out the lawn and build a meadow. And that means killing off your lawn entirely and building a meadow. I don't like digging lawns, though. It's a lot of work, and frankly, my back's not up for it anymore. So you got three general options. There is solarizing, which is, this is often confused. Solarizing is using clear plastic, allowing the light to penetrate. The other end of that spectrum is smothering, which is sometimes done with black plastic, or in most cases, I'll recommend using, cardboard, or this recommends newspapers. So here's a smothering job I did a couple of years ago. This is small scale. This was in a house I was renting at the time. We were just collecting the boxes from, whatever we can get. We laid it down on top of the lawn. We covered it over with a mixture of well-aged wood chips and compost, and we planted raspberries, grapes, and blueberries into it. Easy peasy. It worked out quite well. We were able to mow around it in those areas that we had to keep as lawn. Keep in mind, this wasn't my house, so full lawn destruction was not really in the cards. But this worked quite well for building some, edible plant beds. Getting into what I'll call the medium scale. This is a product called Ramboard. You can find other versions of Ramboard around. It's floor protectant. You'll find it in hardware stores, Home Depot, places like that. It is literally just a roll of cardboard. It's nice that you could just roll it out into these large strips. You overlap them by 4 to 6 inches so the lawn can't poke up in between. And then you cover them over with compost, shredded leaves, wood chips, whatever you happen to have on hand. It's nice when you have equipment. This picture is from Norcross, where I was killing off a section of lawn. But I've also been doing this at home in our orchard, which was about a 1/4 acre of vinca when I first arrived, and I did this all by hand. It's getting, it's getting above the typical range size when you start doing a 1/4 acre by hand. I'd say that's pretty much the limit, but it's totally doable. When you start getting into the larger scale yet, you're stuck, unfortunately, switching over to plastic. These are tarps. These are called silage tarps. This is used in agriculture. If you saw it, they're actually upside down from the way that they're typically designed. They're white on the other side. You throw them over your silage, stuff like corn, reflects the light, keeps it protected. For our purposes, we wanted it black side up to absorb heat. And what we did was to, kind of mow this meadow as low as we could. We actually went in there with a rototiller that was pulled behind on a tractor and set it to about 1/8 of an inch. So it really wasn't tilling deep. But what it was doing is it was breaking up all of those small stems that were sticking up because we didn't want to tear up our tarps. And then we laid down these tarps. These things are 50 feet wide, 200 feet long. I think we laid down 8 of them. And we are smothering a 5-acre meadow. This is an experiment for us. What we were trying to do is see how effective this is for shifting a meadow, which was predominantly bittersweet and mugwort, over to a native species dominated meadow, in this case, without the use of herbicide. Norcross is not an anti-herbicide organization. As I said, we've got 8,400 acres. We have a lot of invasives. I wish I could say we can manage them all without herbicide, but that wouldn't be realistic. That being said, we do like knowing what tools are available to us, how well they work, and how we could recommend them to others. So if, for example, you've got invasive problems in the schoolyard and you don't want to be using herbicides there, this is a potential option for you. That being said, it's not an easy option. So here's a quick little comparison between the two. The smothering here is assuming cardboard and not the silage tarp version of it. I'd say that in our region, I find smothering to be more effective than solarizing. Solarizing needs, a good at least month, and we're talking at least 3 months if you're talking invasive species, of full, bright, sunny, warm weather. So it needs the summer. And you need to leave it for a while, and you don't want to, if it pokes a hole, you kind of got to start the clock all over again. So it's a bit of a challenge around here. That being said, it can be done in the right situation. Smothering, I find, is really, in most cases, more usable, more doable. But there's advantages and disadvantages to both. Your last option is herbicides, including organic herbicides. And I'm going to just kind of lump fire in there. Not that it is an herbicide, but it can kind of be, in this case, treated in a similar manner. And by that, I mean a crew with, kind of flame torches. Herbicides are not great. There's issues associated with herbicides. I don't think that's new information to anyone in this audience. That being said, this experiment was done as a comparison to an herbicide treatment. And one thing I can tell you is that compared to herbicide, this treatment here in this picture costs us about 7 times as much and will take about 4 to 5 times as long to be effective. And that's assuming it is effective, which is definitely not a guarantee just yet. It's also, there's a lot of environmental issues associated with herbicides. There's also an environmental issue with 5 acres of plastic that are eventually going to find their way into a landfill. We can reuse these silage tarps, probably a good couple of times, but I'd be surprised if we get more than 3 uses out of them. They do tend to get beat up. And once they start ripping, they really start ripping. There's tape for for fixing them, which we've been doing. But they definitely have a limited lifespan, and that's a lot of plastic going into a landfill. So it's not a clear-cut, definite better option, but it is an option. And as I said, I wanted to give you tools. You decide what works for you. So as I start wrapping things up, this is the general run-through on how to do this. Stage 1 is decisions. What are your goals? What are your resources? What works for you is pretty much where those two overlap. So what are you trying to accomplish on what timeline, and what do you have to throw at the problem in terms of, working power, money, materials. So if we're talking like ramboard, or wood chips, any of that, these all come into the decisions. Stage 2 is murder. How are you going to remove your lawn? Are you going to smother? Are you going to solarize? Are you going to herbicide? Are you going to rent a sod cutter, which is an option we didn't talk about today? It's not a great option, but it is an option. Or are you just going to throw the neighborhood kid, $15 an hour and say, tear up my lawn? Your timeline can really vary there, but typically, no matter how you do it, you can usually have it done in a season. Initial establishment, this is where things really start to change quite a bit. Most lawn alternatives are done via seed. If we're talking the eco lawns and the non-native alternatives, most lawn alternatives, when we're talking natives, are done via planting plugs or division. So this is that general split. But there's, you can do a meadow from seed as well, or grassland from seed, or you could reforest your area from seed. Early establishment. So for that first season, you're definitely going to want to do your maintenance watering. If we get a rainy season, you might not need to do much. If we get a dry season, you might have to do quite a bit. All of the plants that I recommended today do not need to be watered once they're established. But that first establishment season, you got to baby them, kind of help them get started. Then they become the bomb-proof plants later on. Weeding really as needed. The weeding will always be heaviest in that first season. And in many cases, you never need to weed again. In some cases, you might need to put in an hour in your second season and 10 minutes in your third season. That's pretty much describes our strawberry lawn. And then stage 5 is to live your best life and not worry about your lawn anymore. Look out for any possible issues that might show up, act accordingly. Frankly, they're probably going to be pretty minimal. So final thoughts. The question is, should we kill every lawn in the United States? I don't think that is necessarily a realistic sort of goal. I think there are places such as sports fields, farmers markets, similar sort of in areas where lawns still make at least some sense. Maybe they can be treated differently. Maybe they can be converted to different sorts of species, but it makes sense for there to be lawns in those places. These are the areas I get a little more annoyed with. It's two ends of the same spectrum. On the top, we've got this giant open space where it's like, I don't know what to do with all this land, so I'll just plant a lawn. Ironically enough, these are often the ones that seem to come with the keep off the lawn signs, which kind of ruins the whole, well, my kids play on it argument. And on the other end of the spectrum, we've got a picture from Somerville there where we've got these tiny little spaces, which I think really just represent a lack of imagination. I don't know what to do with this tiny little area. I guess I'll stick a lawn in there. There are other things that this could be. That could be raised beds. That could be vegetable production. That could be ornamental. Frankly, that could be a little tiny touch of a meadow. There's lots of options. So the conclusion, as I said earlier, was do what works for you. What I was really hoping to do today was give you all of the tools that you need to kind of make your own decisions. I don't tend to find it works all that well when I tell people what to do. If anything, it works better when I tell them what not to do, and then they just get grumpy and do the opposite. So instead, I want you to take all of these tools and think about what works for you and then tell people about it, because this is a problem that affects all of us. With that in mind, I know I've got some questions. It's not yet 1 o'clock, so I'm happy to take any questions we have. And if we're not in a giant rush to bust out of here at 1, I'm happy to take questions for longer. Thank you very much for listening today. And do I have some help with dealing with questions? Carol, Jane?
Carol is working on unmuting.
Good.
There you go. Go ahead.
Thank you. Dan, thank you. It was terrific. You certainly gave us a broad range of tools to think about converting our lawns if we haven't already started that process. And I must say I've gained a tremendous, I have wild strawberry and have used it, but your information has made it really such a star plant. So a couple questions here, since no one has asked. What about ticks? I have Pachysandra, unfortunately, and my dog finds all the ticks in there. I guess we wouldn't want
Pachysandra is a real tick magnet.
Yeah.
All right, so here's the rundown. There will be next to no ticks in a traditional lawn because of the fact that we mow the living daylights out of it and that we treat it with God knows what all the time. So, you're not going to find ticks in the lawn for the same reason you're not going to find ticks on the asphalt parking lot. That being said, it's still a ecological disaster as far as I'm concerned. That keeps ticks away from that area. It doesn't do anything to reduce the ticks in the area. That being said, we can do quite a bit to actually reduce ticks on the large scale. The really simple thing that we need to do is just solve climate change. But on the more realistic side of things, encouraging tick predators is something we can do. The major predator of ticks in our region from a population dynamics point of view are songbirds. Birds eat huge amounts of ticks. If you want to compare, say, the chickadee to the possum wins out, but there's a lot more chickadees around. And so when we start talking about building out strawberry lawns or carex lawns or meadows, what we start doing is building healthy habitats. And with those healthy habitats come a lot of tick predators. So what ticks really like is moisture. And that's why you will find ticks so heavily in broad-leafed monocultures like Pachysandra that we talked about. So stuff like Carex pennsylvanica tends to have next to no ticks in it. They really don't hide very well in there. The air moves through it more effectively. You will find more ticks in the strawberry lawn than you will in the Carex lawn, but that strawberry lawn also brings in a lot more birds. And so the tick predators come in and really help to reduce things quite nicely. Where ticks are the worst tends to be the transition zones between, say, a lawn or gardens and the woods. That edge is where the ticks really like to be. They get the most activity from, traffic, as in deer, people, dogs, kind of in the open areas. But the wooded areas, especially with a leaf litter, is where they can survive the dry spells, which often is just the middle of the day, from their point of view. So when we start building habitat, we start bringing in ticks, tick predators, and we start kind of bringing down our tick numbers. But it's not a quick thing. If you really want to know that if ticks are your only issue and you really don't care about the environment or anything else, then stick to the lawn. That's going to have the lowest amount of ticks in it. It's also going to have the lowest amount of bees, butterflies, birds, and it's going to have a whole bunch of other problems associated with it. Ticks, unfortunately, are looking at an increase in a warming climate. And I kind of joked earlier about if we just solve climate change, that'll solve the tick problem. It's not a simple solution. It won't be, unfortunately.
Right. Here's a question. It sounds like they put down some black earth compost on their neglected lawn, and they ended up with a boom of Star of Bethlehem. And that's an issue for them because they like their guinea pigs to graze in the lawn. It sounds like the Star of Bethlehem is poisonous to their guinea pigs.
It is. It's poisonous to a lot of mammals.
Yeah, so they say, how do we prevent the bad players from taking over as we move to a more ecological yard?
Yeah, that's a matter of sourcing some better compost, unfortunately, because that Star of Bethlehem, it might have been there already, in which case you just fed it, but more likely it was introduced with the compost. And it can be hard to find good compost, unfortunately. There are certain brands that I found to be really quite effective. Coast of Maine seems to be really,
Right.
it's a good product and it seems to be pretty widely available, which I really like. Another option for you is to start composting yourself, and this can be done by buying compost. If you are to buy, say, your black earth compost, if that's all that's around, buy yourself 10, 12, 15 bags of it, open them up and put them in a pile, preferably somewhere that's nice and bright, because what that's going to do is they're going to get rained on, the seed in there is going to start to grow, and it's going to continue to compost, especially if you throw some more material into it. Wood chips are a great option for this, or leaf mulch. And if you allow that a season to mature, then you can use that compost the next season, knowing that the seed bank has already been exhausted and has been composted. And it's a pain to have to wait the first season, but if you start doing this regularly, you've always got last year's stuff ready to go. And then this is where you can start adding your own compost out of your kitchen and your lawn and your garden scraps as well, and start to really increase things. But good compost is frankly something that you got to kind of work for sometimes. Talking to folks about where they get their compost in your specific area, finding out what works well. Some towns do municipal compost. In some cases, that's a godsend. In other cases, that's a great source of Japanese knotweed. So getting to know how your municipal compost is treated. And I know there's great compost companies out there. The one that I have used in terms of bag stuff is Coast of Maine, and it's been very effective for me. So it's one that I often recommend. It costs a little bit more, but the problems associated with bad compost tend to outcost the price of the good compost.
Thank you. Question on violets. What's their traffic tolerance?
They range greatly. There's so many different violets out there, but if we're talking about the common ones we mentioned, Viola cerurea, Viola sagittata, traffic tolerance is probably solidly in the middle. I wouldn't play games of soccer on it, but regularly walking on them, they'll be perfectly fine unless they're like in the middle of the path where you're walking on them every single time you walk. If you start getting into ones like Britain's violet, which is a rare one, or bird's foot violet, those traffic tolerance is significantly lower. So it will depend a little bit on the variety. There is one reasonably common non-native violet around here, the English violet, which its foot traffic tolerance is just about as high as our native kind of common ones, the blue violets I mentioned. That one probably won't have the same ecological value as the natives, but it's still a pretty valuable plant in terms of a non-native. So it's one that, if you really want to go whole hog full native, you can target it for removal, but at the same time, you've likely got bigger fish to fry, and I tend to give it a pass.
Question on Asian jumping worms. They have them in their yard and they seem to eat the clover. So they think they're eating the clover. Do you know of a good way to manage the worms so I can keep my clover?
Okay, well, there's sorry, I don't have a good answer for you. No, I don't have a good way to deal with them. I'll give you the 10-second version. We've all got Asian jumping worms. They've become a more commonly known problem recently. But if you've ever done any landscaping on your land, if you've ever bought plants from a nursery, if you've ever planted something on your landscape, or someone who did before you were there did, there's a very decent chance you have Asian jumping worms. They are pretty much throughout any built landscapes. And that is every single site that I have monitored for Asian jumping worms that has any history of planting on it has had Asian jumping worms. So we worry a lot about moving them around. I think that's fair, and that's absolutely essential if we're talking about a landscape that doesn't yet have them. But concerns with moving Asian jumping worms to your neighbor's property is, frankly, they've already got them, you've already got them. And the controls I've seen for Asian jumping worms are they are always worse than the problem. They are a full-scale sterilization. You sterilize your entire soil system, you kill off everything good. It's frankly not worth the control of the Asian jumping worm. I'm hoping that in the future we'll have some better answers. Right now, we kind of are just stuck to live with them, and I don't have anything better to tell you, which is unfortunate. I wish I did.
Right. So we have a question of, what about letting the lawn grow? No new plantings. I really don't feel like doing a lot of work anymore.
Well, letting the lawn grow gives you a tall lawn, which tends to be a maintenance nightmare. It's a lot of work. You tend to get a lot of fungal issues in lawn that is allowed to get tall. You will definitely see more tick activity in there. And you will get seed blowing around everywhere, showing up in all of your garden beds and all of your neighbors' gardens beds. A well-managed, kind of native lawn or a well-managed meadow will become a very low maintenance landscape, but it is a lot of work to get there. We tend to have this idea that meadows are an easy thing, and in 10 years time, they're an easy thing, even in 5 years time with some good work, but that establishment period is a lot of work. And this is where I tend to say, if possible, throw some manpower at it. I think there's been a bit of a loss in the value of the local, young, excitable, and energetic children. I hire pretty much every kid on my, my road to come over to my house and weed for me and remove invasive species for me. And it's frankly so much cheaper than the professionals. And there are plenty of times where the professionals are the way to go. I'm not going to hire the neighborhood kid to spray herbicide. But that being said, there is definitely something to be said for manpower, or woman power for that matter. This is where, your solarizing or more likely your smothering can really start to remove the amount of work that is traditionally thought of with lawn removal. As I said, don't dig your lawn up. It is so much more work than it's worth. Throw some cardboard down, throw some material on top of it, and start small. So if your lawn is this big, I want you to just do this bit, just that strip there. Or maybe even just this top strip there. And the nice thing about, let's say we did strawberries up there, you're ready to now do this area. You don't actually have to do anything. Just throw down some cardboard here, throw some soil on top, the strawberries will fill in. And you can kind of leapfrog along. So you take it just little bits at a time. Because frankly, I was stupid to do a 1/4 acre lawn replacement by hand in one fell swoop. I learned that it was a bad idea. I did it and I've continued to do it, and it was a ton of work. What we should have done was done it piecemeal, but I like to go whole hog. There's nothing wrong with starting small.
Here's a good one. They have a problem with sheep sorrel, and smothering doesn't seem to be working, and it's really taken over their yard. Any suggestions?
Yeah, sheep sorrel is one that has the plants themselves are pretty easy to kill off, but they tend to establish a solid seed bank. So you get constant new seedlings coming up. So smothering can work, but it does need to be a pretty deep smother, and you need to be really careful about not digging into your smothered area, because if you dig down, you've then just brought that seed to the surface. The other thing you could do is a repeated sort of tilling operation. This is something that can be done mechanically with a rototiller, or I just have like a hand hoe that I use in small areas. You're going to scrape the area. It's going to look great. You're going to think the job is done. And in a week's time, you're going to have 10,000 sheep sorrel seedlings coming up again. And then you scrape it again and you scrape it again. And as you continue to do this, you will be, exhausting that seed bank. If the area is sunny, and not too huge, this is where solarizing really shines. Because what solarizing do is it heats up the soil and it kills off that seed bank as well. So if you're able to get kind of a nice clear piece of plastic over it, at first you're going to see everything growing because you pretty much just created a greenhouse. But as those plants start to grow and hit the top of that plastic, they're going to start to lose the moisture in there. They're going to start to desiccate. And as you allow it to sit for the summer, it's just going to be baking that soil. I've seen studies that say that soil can get in excess of 150, 160 degrees. It will bake out the seed bank, which is great for something like sheep sorrel. What I recommend after a solarizing operation, though, is you've just baked your soil. So that's when you want to reinvigorate your soil. So throwing some compost down, getting that to get the life kind of back into your soil is a great kind of next step after solarizing. But even herbicide's kind of useless on it, because you'll herbicide, you kill off all the plants you see, and then the seed bank just recovers. So you really need to exhaust that seed bank. Deep smother or solarize.
Nice. So this, Carolyn says, part of my lawn has lots of daisies growing in it and eastern paintbrush. We wait until they flower to mow. Will that keep them coming back?
It will keep them coming back. It won't really aid their spread, because if you mow them after they bloom, you've cut off their ability to produce seed. So if you want them to spread, you're going to want to kind of wait a little bit longer, let them go into seed and then mow. That being said, the other thing you can do is if you've got a nice chunk of them somewhere, you can start doing some kind of small scale smothering around that chunk, which will then allow them to spread into those new areas they've just smothered out. But what you described is not going to harm them in the long term. It's just going to kind of stop them from spreading, but they will continue to come up and bloom for you unless something drastically changes. And they're nice looking. Especially the daisy is a term that unfortunately means about 12 different species in our area. But one of the common ones that are around is a species called the fleabanes, which are sometimes called fleabane daisy and often just called daisy. They're a lovely early blooming native aster family plant. They're a valuable plant ecologically, and they're frankly just lovely to look at. The common ones are this kind of light pink color. They're all over my, kind of orchard area, and there's something I look forward to every spring.
Nice. So these folks have spread clover and they stop mowing as often as they used to. They don't use fertilizers or pesticides. And this year we noticed lots of voles. Is this going to be a problem going forward?
Not likely. Voles will do some damage to the roots of the clover. The clover will fill right back in afterwards. Voles are reasonably common on the landscape, and you might even see some additional issues coming about in terms of predators coming in to eat your voles. But an established patch of clover is a very resilient thing and will likely fill right back in on you. If you ever see any areas where it seems to really be thinning out, a top dressing of compost will reinvigorate it in almost a matter of moments. That's one of the nice things about clover is it's a very resilient species. It can handle things like voles or foot traffic or chickens or any abuse you can throw at it.
Nice. So dandelions are non-native. Do we want to remove them rather than let them spread, despite honeybees also non-native?
It really depends on how far you want to go with this. What I usually tend to say is, if you still have a lawn, removing your lawn is going to be more valuable than removing your dandelions. If you still have invasive species in your area, removing the invasive species is going to be more valuable than removing the dandelions. Dandelions tend to get more credit than I think they deserve. They're also not an invasive species. They're definitely not causing nearly as much harm as plenty of other issues on the landscape. So I tend to kind of look at them as small potatoes compared to some of the other issues around. That being said, if you've been at this for a while and you've got a landscape that is, 90% native and doesn't have lawn anymore, and you're looking to really go that next step, then yeah, you could remove your dandelions, you could replace them with a native species, and you're going to add that much more ecological value to your landscape. But that is probably not a realistic, place that most of us are in. For most of us, I just say, there's bigger fish to fry.
Right. Here's another one. How do I stop the spread of lily of the valley?
Oh, that one's a beast. I have effectively smothered that one. That being said, when I talked earlier about smothering, I would talk about a layer of cardboard and then a layer of wood chips on top. With lily of the valley, you need to go the full hog smothering. So it's a layer of cardboard, it's a layer of compost, it's another layer of cardboard, it's a layer of wood chips. We're talking about getting, at least 8 to 14 inches of stuff on top of it. And if your lily of the valley covers this area, you need to smother out to here because it will kind of run out from underneath. It's a beast. It's not an easy one to smother. You can solarize it. That being said, lily of the valley is usually growing in shadier environments, and the solarizing just won't work in the shady environments. It can be done with repeated tilling, but you need to be repetitive about it. We're talking at least 3, preferably 4 tilling events per season. And that's going to keep going for probably at least 2 years, likely 3, because every time you cut up those rhizomes, they're going to regrow. And then you till again and you cut up the rhizomes and they regrow, and you gotta keep going at it till you exhaust them. You can exhaust them, but you need to be consistent about it. If you till solidly for a season and then don't do it the next year, and they come back, you pretty much need to pretend you're starting all over again. You can't say, oh, I've done 1 year, I've only got 3 more to go. You've done nothing at this point. You got to start all over again. Tilling is not great for the landscape. That being said, there's other options which are worse for the landscape, like spreading a bunch of herbicide down. We tend to use tilling as a pretty effective tool on a lot of our post-agricultural landscapes at Norcross. We tend to give a pass in terms of tilling those areas because they were often previously tilled, and so the damage has kind of already been done. It's something that can be done at home with kind of a small-scale rototiller. This is something that's usually available for rental through a local rental center or through a local Home Depot. If it's a larger scale, you can get these kind of pull-behind tillers that come on the back of tractors. Other than that, you're looking at some deep, and I mean deep, solid, thick smothering. and some consistency. You kind of can't ever give up on it until the job's done or it just starts all over again. That's a tough one. Lily of the Valley is not quite as bad as Japanese knotweed, but it's up there as one of the hardest ones to remove. You have to be consistent.
So I'll just do these two last questions. Is there ecological value to common plantain? And is cinquefoil native and a good trafficked lawn ground cover?
All right, so plantain is represents a genus of which there are native and non-native species. The native ones are not super common, but there's an easy way to tell them apart. If the plantain goes into flower, look for blue pollen. Our native one has this blue pollen, which is very noticeable if you're looking for it, at least. It's not super uncommon. It's also not super common. It's extremely valuable ecologically. The non-native ones are actually quite valuable ecologically. Plantains are kind of funny, where there are some native specialist species that host on plants other than the native plantain, but will host on the non-native plantains. The Baltimore checker spot is an interesting example. It hosts on chelones, the turtle heads, and on the English plantain. I have no idea why. And there's a couple other examples to that. So for a non-native species, even for a non-native, usually weedy species, it's actually quite valuable. Not as valuable as our native species, and there's that kind of, decide what works for you. But it's not a demon plant the way some of the other ones out there are. I'll take non-native plantain over a Pachysandra or a Vinca or a Lily of the Valley any day of the week. Mm-hmm. And then we asked about cinquefoil. So most of the cinquefoils are native. There are two very common ones in the area, Podentilla canadensis and Podentilla simplex. There's also a reasonably common non-native one. Ecologically, they seem to be reasonably valuable. Let's just call them medium value. Definitely some value there, definitely some spread potential there. I even thought about testing one as a possible lawn alternative. I haven't done it yet. If that's what you're thinking, please do, and let me know how it goes. So again, it's kind of a choice for you. They're what I sometimes label as the take them or leave them weeds. If you don't like them where they are, call them a weed, remove them. It's not the end of the world if you do. You're not removing some rare species. And if they're not bothering you, they're probably worth leaving because they tend to have some value to them.
Wonderful. Dan, this has been so informative. There's a number of comments, quite a few, about how valuable your information was. One said, this is the most valuable, informative webinar I've ever attended. I'm just really thankful that we were able to arrange this and get this information out. And it will be available on our West Newbury Wild and Native site as soon as we're able to get it up. It'll also be available on the West Newbury cable channel. And Jane, thank you again. This has been fantastic. Thank you, everyone. And thank you all for attending.
Have a good one, everyone. Nice talking to you.
Thank you, Dan.